This meeting is being recorded.
Give it a minute. Hello and welcome to CYDA's Federal Election Forum, Young, Powerful and Engaged. We really appreciate your support with attendance and look forward to hearing the questions that you have for our panellists. Thank you to our panellists who are joining us today for making space to listen to our community. I'm going to mention the accessibility features that we have available. So we are joined by two Auslan interpreters who are now visible on the screen. We also have live closed captioning available at the bottom of the screen. You will need to turn on the captions first. You can do that by at the bottom, you can click the button that says CC, the live transcription, and turn them on from your computer. If you need any assistance today, please use the chat option to message CYDA staff. The chat function has been turned on purely as a way for attendees to message CYDA staff with access and tech help or safety concerns. So the chat will not be used for general conversation or to interact with the panel. To begin, we would like to first acknowledge the country and the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting on today. So all calling in from different lands today. I'm on the beautiful land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation in Perth, Western Australia. Please feel free to pause for a minute and acknowledge the country on which you're calling from. We acknowledge the historical and ongoing contributions to caring for country and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. My name is Kay. I use they, them pronouns. I am a white, feminine presenting person with shoulder length red hair, and I'm wearing a black shirt and overalls with little kiwi birds on them. I'm a lived experience officer at Children and Young People with Disability Australia and a young autistic person with a lived experience of physical disability and chronic illness. So I'm joined by three other CYDA staff members today. You can't see them on the screen at the moment, so they're all in the background, but when Mary does share her screen, so you'll be able to see Mary's screen a little bit later today, but we do have two CYDA staff members, Miranda and Sue, who are not visible on the screen today, but will be managing the chat. So they're both members of CYDA's policy team. For the webinar today, I'll briefly talk about CYDA's election platform. We will then be hearing individually from three politicians, Senator Hollie Hughes, the Honourable Mr. Bill Shorten and Senator Jordan Steele-John. We will then have a question and answer period. This webinar has been established to provide a space for young people with disability to be involved in conversations that directly impact our lives. We want to create a space where young people with disability feel prioritised and heard. And so in the question and answer period, we will preference questions by these young audience members, as well as pre-submitted questions by young people. CYDA's 2022 election platform, Clearing the Roadblocks, Promoting Equitable Pathways and Opportunities, was released 3 weeks ago. So this document, which is available on the CYDA website, but we will pop a link in the chat as well, is a call to action for all parties in the upcoming election to prioritise specific areas and actions that influence the lives of young people with disability. There are 9 recommendations that are centred on empowering young people with disability and their families to live lives with equality of experiences where they're able to fully exercise their rights and follow their aspirations. This platform draws on the insights and lived experiences of young people with disability, and the recommendations are informed by numerous young voices engaged with CYDA through events, surveys, co-designs and consultations over the last few years, including young people who attended the National Youth Disability Summit in 2020 and the 2021 Lived Experience Focus Group Series. The election platform has 3 priority areas. The first priority is to ensure equity in education so that all young people are able to engage with an inclusive education system that includes a national inclusive education plan and ensures universal access to high quality and affordable early childhood education and care. Rights to quality education that meets the needs of the disability community is so important, and CYDA is calling on the incoming government to protect the educational rights of children and young people with disability, and ensure that education providers, be it early childhood providers, schools, post-schools and adult education settings, meet their obligations to provide meaningful education for young people with disability. Secondly, we are also calling on the incoming government to support young people in finding quality and secure employment. And secure employment opportunities with an employment system that is based on research and co-designed with young people with disability. Young people need more support with transitions to their career and workplaces following graduation from high school, and we need investments in supporting young people to gain post-school qualifications. For me, as a young person about to navigate that transition from education to full-time employment, this priority area is personally really important to me, and the difficulties in finding work that is meaningful and meets my needs is a common experience between my disabled peers. CYDA is also asking for reform in the disability support pension, which is currently failing to adequately support young people with disability who need to navigate quite complex eligibility barriers and also punitive compliance measures. The third priority area for young people with disability is leading equity through accountability and opportunity. We urge the incoming government to establish an office for children and young people with a dedicated minister to ensure that the rights of young people are promoted and held across government. Young people who are neglected in our systems, including young people with disability, need to be heard, and they need a coordinated effort to design solutions to meet their needs. Other support systems, including the NDIS, need guaranteed ongoing and sufficient funding for young people, and we need a recovery plan, focus on equitable access for new entrants. The COVID pandemic is far from over for young people with disability, and we need a recovery plan to mitigate the long-term consequences of the COVID crisis to protect children and young people from developmental, social, and economic scarring effects of the pandemic. This election and the incoming government have a wonderful opportunity to support young children and young people to thrive, both now and as they transition into adulthood. And we need an upcoming government to take this opportunity to create lasting and meaningful reform to improve our lives. When children and young people are given equal opportunities to engage in quality education, employment, make friends, enjoy community life, we all benefit culturally, socially, and economically. So next we'll be hearing from our panelists. We will provide a bio in the chat if you would like some more information. Firstly, we'll be hearing from Senator Hollie Hughes, who is representing the Liberal Party of Australia. Senator Hughes has long blonde hair and is wearing a blue shirt and red lipstick. Senator Hughes was elected in the Senate in 2019, and she comes from a career in communications and advocacy for rural and regional Australia, and has spent the last 20 years living in the country in northwestern New South Wales. She is a mother of 3 and has extensive understanding of the difficulties navigating barriers that rural families experience. She has a son with autism, and in 2019, she was appointed the chair of the Senate Select Committee on Autism. Our next panellist is Senator Jordan Steele-John, who is representing the Australian Greens Party. Senator Steele-John has brown hair and is wearing a blue shirt, and he first entered politics in 2017. He has a lived experience of disability and is the youngest person in the Senate. He is passionate about addressing the climate crisis and has spent a lot of time campaigning in the disability, health and peace spaces. Firstly, we'll pass to Senator Hughes. So when you're ready, Senator. Sorry, Senator, I think you're still muted.
Okay, thank you. There you go. So you'd think after this long on Zoom calls, we'd all be a bit better than that. So thank you so much for that introduction, and it's lovely to be here with you all tonight. It is a bit funny being back on a Zoom call because we had recently moved to a lot more face-to-face meetings. So I must say, setting up the tech tonight, I apologise if I drop out or get it wrong, but I think I'm all set up on the right stand that should stay standing. But I have done television where it's fallen over mid-sentence, so I apologise. Look, tonight I wanted to be with you and just outline some of the things that have been going on within the disability space. As you mentioned, I chaired the Senate Select Committee into Autism, and it's the first time a report and an inquiry into the whole of life experience of autistic people and their family had ever been conducted. We tabled that report, and Senator Steele-John was part of the committee as well. We tabled that report just before Parliament rose, and it has 81 recommendations. And the very, very first recommendation that we made, that there was a need for a national autism strategy. And just over a week ago, I was with Senator Ann Ruston, and we announced funding of $1 million for the first 12 months to establish the national autism strategy. And I am pleased that Labor has also backed that initiative, which means regardless of the result on Saturday, you will be getting the development of a national autism strategy. And by putting it together in this way, certainly the way that I had looked at it and spoken with Anne as we put together the program, was to ensure that the complexity in developing this strategy is recognised, because when we look at autism and we look at disability more generally, it does cover significant levels of government and a number of agencies. So it is very difficult when you're trying to navigate across all of those spaces. And the one important thing that became very prevalent for us throughout the inquiry was this isn't all about the NDIS. And I think there's been, particularly at the state government level, who used to have responsibility for a lot of things across disability, which was then moved into the NDIS, have really removed themselves from the disability space, which has left a lot of gaps and has certainly left a lot of people, and particularly children and young people, at risk of falling through the cracks. And I was just listening, Kay, to the 3 tenets that you have in your platform. And equity in education is absolutely a key one. And it is one of the ones that has fallen through the cracks, I think, most significantly. We've seen that when a lot of kids and families are trying to get their children into school, whether it's mainstream or a special needs specific school, that the right level of supports aren't being provided. And as was mentioned, I'm the mother of an autistic child. We did not start at the school that my elder daughter was at when Fred was starting school, because that school was not interested in providing any supports to my son. We did then go to a really lovely little school that I moved all my children to, who provided great supports and worked closely with us. And then when we moved to Sydney a few years ago, we were blessed with a wonderful principal at a public school, but it has become increasingly apparent that it is leadership-led from the top. It isn't a uniform standard across, particularly here in New South Wales, but we heard that all around the country. So when we talk about the autism strategy and disability strategy more broadly, it does mean bringing together all those levels of government so that we can improve that equity in access to education and proper supports. And then, of course, that filters through to both the TAFE and university sector. When it comes to employment, we have invested a lot of money as a government into employment. We know that there's a review, or you would all be aware there's a review at the moment into the Disability Employment Services program. Some of us are fans of it, some of us are not. And I think there are plenty of ways that it can be done much, much better. I was also with Senator Ruston as well as Ben Gauntlet last year when we launched through the National Disability Employment Strategy, Employ My Ability. But we've also invested a significant amount of money into delivering an accessible online job platform, which does help people with a disability into mainstream job opportunities, but also help employers to recognise barriers to entry and little things that can be done to assist that transition. I certainly have tried to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. I've been in the Senate for almost 3 years. One of my staff is an autistic young man who had never had a job before, but we worked with him and he started doing some really quite basic administrative tasks. He has had one lot of official assistance come in, which, cost, I think from memory, about $6,000. And just that small amount of support enabled him to grow his role, to grow in confidence, but also develop new skills, to the point that he's now running part of our mail programs and different things in the office completely independently. And we do know that after this election's over, it's one of the discussions we're having is that what does his next role look like, either in my office, or is it time to support him to look at something else, because he will have been with me for nearly 3 years. So I can personally see the difference it's made to his life, the difference it's made to his parents and siblings' life, and his confidence and his security and how he feels as part of a team, but also the support that he's got. With the Children and Young People program, I know my 5 minutes is up and I could go for days, but I'll try and leave it for questions. That's a specific portfolio that's above my pay grade, but I think it's definitely something that we should look at putting to the new Prime Minister or the returned Prime Minister, wherever we land on Sunday morning.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Senator Hughes, for that. I just want to introduce Senator Steele-John, so whenever you're ready.
Hello. Sorry about that, Kay. I was just clicking the wrong buttons. You would think after 2 years doing this stuff by Zoom, we'd be able to get our head across it by now. It is so wonderful to be with you all this evening. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this vital discussion. I want to acknowledge, first of all, that I am coming from you, sitting upon the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and that disability justice and First Nations justice are inextricably connected together. In the time that I've got to just outline the relevant pieces of the Greens election pitches in this area, I want to focus on the ones that are most relevant to the CYDA election platform, which we in the Greens fully endorse every single principle. You can look at the broader Accessible Australia initiative on the website. We can link it in the chat, but I want to tackle first of all head on the question of education and also of employment. The Greens believe that it is the right of every disabled student to be educated in a mainstream education system alongside their non-disabled people, non-disabled peers, and to be provided with all the necessary supports and adaptations to enable them to do that. It is not okay that in 2022, somewhere between 15 to 20% of disabled students are educated in segregated so-called special school settings, when we have 60 years worth of academic research that states absolutely emphatically that segregated educational settings do not provide equitable outcomes for disabled students. We know that the mainstream education system with the right supports for the properly funded public school system is not only where disabled students have the right to be, but it is also where we will get the best education outcomes for ourselves. And so we are proposing a national transition plan in line with the ask made by the Coalition for Inclusive Education, that we achieve a fully inclusive education system and the elimination of segregated schooling by 2030. We've allocated $10 million to the creation of a national transition plan to be co-designed, but alongside and with disabled students, parents, teachers, school administrations and unions to make sure that that transition plan works, that it redeploys teachers and resources where needed, and that transition plan will be fixed immovably upon achieving the goal of a fully integrated education system and the elimination of segregated education, because there is no excuse for segregation. For too long, we've had both parties supporting segregated education, building more special schools when we know that they are harmful to us as young disabled people. That needs to stop, and the Greens will put a stop to it. Moving then through to the workforce, we want to see the establishment of a 20% employment rate of disabled people in the federal public service by 2030, a figure to be matched by the state and territory public services, so that there is a real possibility that you as a disabled person will be employed in delivering the public services that so often shape our lives. And we want to see a managed transition plan away from segregated employment settings such as ADEs, so that every disabled person either has the opportunity to be employed in the mainstream employment market or to be properly supported through income streams and social security benefit protections. In WA, we've just had the unexpected closure of Active Industries here, a notorious ADE provider that pays its workers only dollars on the hour, for work than anybody else would get the minimum wage. And that has left 740 people that participate in those programs completely abandoned, shocked, and unsure of where to go next. We need to make sure that that doesn't happen to any other families or any other disabled people with a managed transition plan that retains people's supports. And that brings me through to the other element of the CYDA platform, which is the need to increase the disability support pension, to increase the DSP by at least $88 a day, so that nobody that is a disabled person has to struggle financially or is condemned to live in poverty. We want to do all of these things while fixing the NDIS, making access easier, giving the agency more employees to do their job, and critically, in 2022, the Greens are proposing that in a time when our community rightly expects that the Minister for First Nations people is a First Nations person, and the Minister for Women is a woman, that the next Minister for Disabilities should be a disabled person, because nothing without us, nothing about us without us must for the next 3 years be at the center of everything that is done in the disability space. Hey, perfectly to time. I never do that. I'm surprised myself. Happy to take your questions and looking forward to fleshing out more elements of the Accessible Australia platform together.
Awesome. Thank you, Senator Steele-John, and good job with staying exactly on 5 minutes. So we're waiting a little bit for the Honourable Bill Shorten to join us. He'll be joining us a little bit later, but in the meantime, we'll start the question and answer portion of the webinar. So to describe how we can do these questions and answers, there are 2 different options that you have to ask your questions. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there is a button that says Q&A. So if you click that one, you will be able to type in your questions. If you prefer to answer your questions verbally, you can use the raise hand function. So that's also on the bottom of the screen under where it says more. It's got 3 little dots, and then you should be able to raise your hand, and then we will call on you and the CYDA staff will unmute you, but they won't turn your video on, but they will unmute you. So we have a couple of questions coming through now, but please feel free to either type them in the chat. We also have some pre-submitted questions from young people online. Just a reminder that because we really want to create a space for young people with disability to have their voices heard, we will be prioritising questions from the young disabled community and young disabled attendees. So the first question, so I'll just read this off the screen. So this is for both Senator Steele-John and Senator Hughes. So there has been some recent feedback saying that the disability community is too angry to make change. How do you value the passion of the disability community, and how do you make sure that they are included in these changes? So I'll give you a minute to think about it. I won't put you on the spot. Senator Steele-John, did you want to answer first?
Absolutely. I think that we have been, over the last 3 years particularly, rightly very angry. As disabled people, we campaigned together. If you want to jump back a decade, right, we were, as disabled people, suffering under a separated system of disability supports which were letting us down, state-based systems. And we came together, disabled people, our allies, family members, to end that dynamic, to deliver an NDIS which would provide for our support needs, that would ensure that we got what we needed to live a good life, that would centre our goals and our lived experience, and to respect the information that we gather and know about our disabilities, about us, from health professionals that we work with and all the rest of it. And we've seen many situations, independent assessments is one of them, but there have been many others where those principles and that scheme has either been undermined or actually just devalued. And then if you kind of match that with the cutting of people's plans, there are very many reasons to be angry and to be frustrated. But I've also seen CYDA and many other organizations like CYDA, actually, even though we're in a global pandemic and they're not funded very well and all the things, just take a deep breath and very calmly go, these are the things we need to do to fix the system, like very kind of collaboratively, and that just doesn't get taken up. And I think that's why we need lived experience, not only in the disability ministry, but also across the decision-making spaces, because we as organizations and as individuals shouldn't be expected to continually have to advocate, tell our stories again and again and again, and have nothing change because it falls into the ears of people that just don't get it, because they haven't lived it. I don't know how long I was allocated to answer that. That's the answer. And I'll wait for Kay to take back the case frozen. Oh.
I don't know if I'm on. Maybe I can.
You're on.
Jump in.
Yes, Kay has frozen. I'm Mary. I'm the CEO of CYDA. So lovely to see you, Bill, Honourable Bill Shorten. We'll come to you in a moment. We'll just get Hollie to answer that question, and then we'll hand back to you, Mr. Shorten, to do your 5 minutes around what your plan is. So, Senator, did you want to answer that question?
Oh, look, I'm happy to. I know we have talked about, and I've certainly been someone who's raised this, is the splinters within the disability community. But I guess when Jordan talks about lived experience, I certainly have that more specifically with the autistic community. And I think that over the years, and I've been involved in this community for over a decade, there has been some splits between it, which when you start to come at a political advocacy when the community itself is already torn in two, if not more pieces, it does make it very, very difficult to be effective in your advocacy. And so there are times, and certainly we discovered this during the autism inquiry, of autistic, particularly autistic adults, and their views towards parents of young autistic children and the therapy options that they wanted to undertake. And there was a lot of time, and I've certainly experienced it, and some of that has been directed towards my son in very, very unnecessary and unkind and, in fact, really quite disturbing ways. But what happens when that sort of behaviour occurs is it makes it very, very difficult to effectively advocate on behalf of the community. And I think at the end of the day, when it comes to lived experience, whether it is as a person with a disability or someone who loves and cares for someone with a disability, we agree on much more than we don't. And sometimes I think we do need to get better at putting those things aside, working out where we have a joint focus and joint interest in things moving forward. And I'm sure Senator Steele-John will back me up with the work that I did personally in stopping independent assessments going ahead. I mean, even one of the newspapers reported when it came to those that opposed it, it was perhaps my advocacy that was actually made the biggest impact because I stood up against my own government. And that's something that I've continued to do and will continue to do so, but have always been supported very, very strongly by the Prime Minister and by the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. Both of them were incredibly supportive and understanding when I raised the independent assessments issue with them, and actually backed me the whole way in my efforts to stop them from going ahead. But it is important as a community that we do understand there's lots of different parts of it. There are parents, there are carers, and there are those with the lived experience, and sometimes they can be all three of those things. But we need to be able to bring our interests that are unified together and joint experience, understand that sometimes we're not going to agree on absolutely everything from everyone's different personal lived experience and point of view, but to not turn those into something divisive that can then be used as an opportunity by those, to dismiss any concerns because we can't agree on everything 100%. So I think there are things we can do better if we want to get better outcomes.
Thank you to the two senators. That was a fantastic answer to that question, because the disability movement is a strong movement, and certainly appreciate the respect with which you both operate. Kay, our facilitator, has had a power outage and has been texting me, so unfortunately I have to take over. I'd now like to introduce the Honourable Bill Shorten, who's joining us from the Australian Labor Party. Many of you will know Bill, and I hope it's okay I'll call you Bill, from his long involvement with the disability community, but he commenced being involved in the Labor Party at university, and also worked at a law firm, Morris Blackburn. And many of you will know Bill from when he was at the Australian Workers Union, and he has a strong passion for disability. He lives in Victoria, in Maribyrnong, with his wife Chloe and their 3 children. We won't hold it against him, but he barracks for Collingwood and enjoys taking part in fun runs. So I can see that Kay's joined us, and I'll hand the reins back to Kay once you've given your 5-minute address around what your party is going to be able to offer, particularly young people with disability. Thanks, Bill.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I'm sure it's already happened, but I acknowledge that wherever we are in Australia, we're meeting on Aboriginal land, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And listen, I'd like to give a shout out to Jordan, Steele-John. He's a formidable and passionate and well-informed advocate in the Senate from the Greens Party. But when it comes to disability matters, we've had more agreements than disagreements, and I always listen to what Jordan has to say. And might I surprise everyone by just giving a shout out to Senator Hollie Hughes. She too is a very formidable advocate. And perhaps if she'd been the Minister for the NDIS over the last few years, it wouldn't be in the mess it's in, but she wasn't. But I pay a lot of respect to Hollie, and I always listen very carefully to her. So it's great to be on the same Zoom as all of the team. Labor's policy can be summarised in 2 words about NDIS and disability: restore trust. The problem is that the government, in my opinion, hasn't managed the NDIS well. There have been the attempted independent assessments, which Labor was integral to opposing. And that came from a view that the NDIS is a great idea, but it's got off track, and that there's too much cost cutting. And that what's happened is that the scheme's not being well run, and it's not being run in consultation with the empowerment of people with disability. In a longer form view of how we would restore trust, we want to improve the planning process. We want to lift the staff cap at the agency, because we want more people working in the agency directly who know about disability. We want to increase the proportion of people with disability in the agency, but also in the board and at the senior ranks. We want to tackle, in the first 100 days, if I was to be elected, the first thing I'd ask the agency to do is tell us how prepared we are for the next variant of COVID, because for many people with disability, the COVID virus hasn't stopped. It's still a scary, real issue, and I'm not sure that we're as prepared as we should be. The second thing I will ask to do in the first 100 days is, why on earth are thousands of people being forced to go to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal to get a modest package from the government? In fact, tomorrow we'll be having a bit of a demonstration at the Administrative Appeals Tribunal to draw attention to the fact that the government is currently spending $31 million in the first 8 months of this financial year fighting people with disabilities in order to cut their scheme program benefits. I'm not saying that that every matter that the government's running is wrong, but I have no doubt that at the moment the government is targeting cutting packages of children with autism, and it's targeted people with psychosocial conditions. The next thing I'll ask to do is find out why there's so many delays in terms of assistive technology applications, also with home modifications. We want to, as I said, lift the staff cap. Indeed, what we want to do is put people with disability at the centre of the scheme. So we would commit to revealing the actuarial data, so everyone's got the same facts. We wouldn't play hide and seek with the public. with key information. Furthermore, what we want to do is also make sure that by getting the initial plans right, we can do a better job overall. Perhaps the final thing I might say in my 5 minutes is a couple of things I want to eliminate from the current management of the scheme. One is the view that if you don't spend all your money in 1 year, the amount that you didn't spend is cut from the next year's package. We want to eliminate that policy. We think that just sends all the wrong signals. The other thing is, and I probably share this view with Hollie on this one, we want to bring the sector together. We don't view that carers are different to people with disability, service providers. We want everyone working together, and that's the way that we will, if I get to be the minister, I'll approach the whole NDIS. And perhaps finally, we want to make sure the NDIS is no longer just the oasis in the desert. So I would regard my time as Minister for NDIS to be an ambassador to make sure that people with disability had better representation through the National Disability Strategy, making sure that we sit down with the states to improve transportation, school access, and a range of other measures which the NDIS shouldn't be asked to fix. Rather, it should just be a whole of government approach. Anyway, thank you very much, and thank you for listening to me. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Shorten, and thank you for joining us. So the next question to come from a young person with disability is, what commitments do your parties have to fund programs that build the confidence and the independence of young people with disability? But we might start with Senator Hughes first.
Hello. So I've got a couple of programs here that I'll give you the funding dollars from, but as I mentioned in my initial 5 minutes to you, that we have announced funding for a national autism strategy to ensure that that can be developed. Hi Bill, I hope you're feeling better from COVID, and Chloe managed to avoid it as well. It was good to see that Labor have supported that initiative as well, because by Labor and Liberal both endorsing the $1 million to go towards the establishment of the National Autism Strategy means that that program, regardless of what happens on Saturday night, will go ahead. So that's very, very good news for the autistic community. But there are a number of things that we have already announced, that investments that are going to take place. And that does include the delivery of Australia's Disability Strategy, which runs through to 2031. And that looks at how all governments provide supports and creates inclusivity and accessibility for all people with a disability. And again, what's saying me unity ticket here, it's not always just about the federal government either. It does cross many, many levels of government, and making sure that we're bringing them all together to ensure that people with a disability are supported across all aspects of their life. We did launch the Disability Information Gateway, which helped to streamline communication and make it easier for people with a disability to navigate resources. We have improved employment opportunities by launching the National Disability Employment Strategy, Employ My Ability. We've got more than $8 million in initiatives to deliver an accessible online job platform to attract people with a disability into that mainstream employment, but also support employers and how they can better support those staff. And we do know through experience, all of us, I'm sure, on this Zoom meeting webinar, that sometimes it can be just a different type of lighting or the provision of a quieter space. I know the story of one young man that they used to have a team meeting where everyone used to sort of get up and say what they did on the weekend, and that gave him such massive anxiety. He never wanted to go into work. So they just gave him an exclusion from doing that, and it made such an incredible difference to his work experience. So that's something that costs nothing, but is just about increasing awareness. We have put over $100 million of funding between this year and 2025 for the National Disability Advocacy Program and NDIS Appeals Program. Again, I agree with Bill. There's too many AHE appeals going through. I've certainly been spending quite a bit of time speaking to the CEO about some of these, because we're seeing a lot of them, and This is where I do think it comes down to the agency. It's not even really a government issue as opposed to being driven from inside the agency. Some ideological objections to some forms of therapy, which is creating barriers for particularly families of young children to access the therapy programs that they want to, and that's why they're landing in the AAT process. But we know also too that sometimes those appeals are being settled the night before they're supposed to be heard for the exact amount of money that the parents were originally asking for. So there does need to be some improvements there. I completely agree with that, because parents are already going through enough. They don't need to be going through that process to fight for what they believe is right for their child. We've got $9 million in measures to address violence against women with a disability. And we've also invested $1.4 billion to reform the current Disability Employment Services program. And that's to ensure that we're delivering actual economic and employment outcomes for people with a disability. We don't want to see some of these providers continue where they just put people with a disability through, quite frankly, often inappropriate courses. It's amazing how many people I speak to that have gone through some providers that have just been put into a barista course and then no opportunities. So they're just some of the things that we've done very recently to support the community.
Awesome. Thank you, Senator Hughes. The same question to Senator Steele-John.
Thanks, Kay. So there's a couple of, there's a bloody great question, by the way. There's a couple of things that I would say that are particularly relevant that the Greens have committed to. First of all, particularly in relation to the question of how do we build confidence, right? Confidence is something that is built over time, and often you need security to build it. So one of the things we are really committed to is, as I said earlier, increasing the DSP to at least $88 a day, and thereby kind of making. Oh, hang on, where's my video gone? It's weird. No, yes. Yes, excellent. So yeah, increasing the DSP, but also changing the way that you interact with it. So in 2012, the Labour Minister, Jenny Macklin, brought in some critical changes to the DSP, the introduction of the impairment tables, and that both forced about 200,000 disabled people off the DSP and into what was their New Start, and also made it much more difficult to get on the DSP in the first place. So we do away with those changes because we've heard so consistently how harmful they've been to people, and that was confirmed by a recent additional Senate inquiry that we ran. Then we'd also like to, beyond fixing that kind of certainty of the DSP, we've launched proposed a pilot program to fund 10,000 Australian artists to receive a living wage for a year of around about $800 a week. And I've really heard very clearly from the community that wonderful intersection between disabled people and the arts sector, and how many fabulous disabled artists there are in Australia that actually want to get on and tell their story and share their perspective, you know, with the support to actually do that. So I'm really excited to see the incredible artistic creations that will come from that initiative. We want to see the national peak bodies like CYDA funded with an additional $30 million over the next 4 years so that they can do the incredibly important advocacy work. And for me, I think this all needs to be bound up in a commitment to and an understanding of disability pride, of the social model of disability, moving through to the affirmative model of disability, and embedding disability pride in all of policy. And I'm really proud to say that at the recent national conference the Greens had, before we kind of got into the election campaign period proper, we committed to the principle of disability pride as a party, and placed it at the centre of our disability policy. And we're currently we're the first party to have done that. Because in pride there is power, and in power there will be change. So yeah, I think that's a really great step forward, or roll forward.
So thank you, Senator Steele-John. Mr. Bill Shorten, I might ask you a new question, just so we can get through some of the other audience questions. So many young people with disability want to move out of the home and find it so much more difficult than their non-disabled peers. Some of the issues include a lack of suitable, affordable and accessible housing and long waits for public housing and SCA. What can and should be done to address this issue?
Labor's proposing to invest in social housing, so we want to increase the stock. The reality is that being a private renter is very expensive. So one of the biggest things which drives up the cost of housing and therefore rent is the lack of supply of housing. So we want to do that. We want to build more social housing. And very briefly, just on the other 2 points, I would like, if I become the minister, I'm going to ask every member of parliament to employ a person with a disability and give young people the chance to do internships working with politicians, so they get to see how politics work and hopefully more of them get involved in politics. The other thing I want to do if I become the minister for the NDIS, whilst it's an education issue, I'm going to have a meeting of all the vocational education people. That's the people who talk to kids about what they do after school when they finish school, because I think it's about time we started getting a lot more imaginative about giving people, young people, options for when they finish school. So I just very cheekily gave 2 little answers to the first question, but in doing so, I gave you a brief but detailed answer to your question, which is, let's build more social housing. That will be a big help.
Awesome, thank you, Mr. Shorten.
The
next question is...
Sorry. The other little thing I was just going to say, I would convene a meeting of the real estate industry and the architects and the ministers in charge of planning to make sure that we start pushing better guidelines for universal access in housing so that the housing is appropriate for people with disability. So universal design. Thank you.
The next question is, how will you improve the disability support pension so that there is more flexibility for people with disabilities have the freedom and independence of working where possible, but still receive vital support?
And Senator, it's Mary Sayers speaking here. The question's in the chat as well, because I know that the sound was a little bit cut up. Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yeah, have I got sound?
You do? So the question...
Yeah, I couldn't get the question, sorry.
Okay, so the question was, sorry, Kay cut out. How will you improve the disability support pension so there is more flexibility for people with disability to have freedom and independence of working where possible, but still receive vital support?
And look, this is one of the discussions I've had with Anne Ruston, and we've also had with the former Secretary, Catherine. Now I've got a blank on Catherine's surname because she's moved on. But we did have a discussion about it, because one of the things that does concern me about the DSP, which I think there has been some movement, but probably needs to be a little bit more, is, like as I said, I've got an autistic staffer working in my office. He's been with me 3 years. But one of the restrictions has been about the number of hours that you could work before your disability support pension was cut. And working with some of the employment agencies, if you like, private employment agencies in the sector that have been supporting particularly autistic people getting into work around the cyber space, they were finding there was a reluctance for some of the staff to take on more hours, even though they were more than able to work more hours, because of their concerns of losing their DSP. And the thing about that is that, you know, they don't want to lose it, because quite often it's young men living at home with their mums, and it's a vital part of their household budget. But could they work more hours? But, you know, some of these cyber companies, startups, etc., say it was to shut down at no fault of their own and take them a little while to get their job back or another job. They should have the ability to move on and off the DSP in relation to their hours. And it's something that we've certainly discussed. It was certainly something that was very well received in that discussion. So I'm not going to give you any answers on numbers of hours because I'm actually not sure where they lay. I'm pretty sure we did change them, but I'm sure we could, you know, we need to look at maybe doing that a little bit better. But at the end of the day, it is, in a lot of cases, it would be nice to see it as a safety net rather than something that people rely on, because I think the focus should be on it supporting people to get into employment, because it's not only economic benefits that they receive, but it is that social engagement, it is that confidence boost. It is so much better for their mental health to get up and go to work and have that inclusion in society. So certainly from my point of view, I would like to see the DSP become something that is a safety net, that is there for those with a disability that require it. We do know that there are some people that, you know, work is going to be a little bit out of their realm of what they can and can't do at times, sometimes consistently, but sometimes intermittently in their life. But we do need to provide that flexibility. But I would like to see the focus on getting as many people as possible into those workplace opportunities.
Thanks for that answer. I'll hand back to Kay.
Wonderful.
I think Kay's back.
Sorry, they're doing some construction around my house, so the internet keeps cutting out. But we have a question specifically for Senator Steele-John. As an avid activist for people with disabilities, what precautions do you take to ensure all disabled voices are elevated, invisible disabilities, etc., to detract from the conventional stereotypes surrounding legitimacy of disability?
That is an excellent question, because I think it's worth acknowledging that in some ways, like I'm a very proud disabled person, and I'm really proud of the work that me and the team do in the space, in the disability advocacy space. But I'm also really conscious that as somebody that is, you know, physically disabled, and you know, I've got cerebral palsy, and also, you know, as a bloke, I carry a hell of a lot of privilege with me into the spaces that I work in, regardless of whether I'm a disabled person or not. And the perspective that I have as a disabled person is just the perspective of my particular experience in some ways, and also that of being a physically disabled person. And so in the work that we have done over the last 4 years, because I'm conscious of that, I've both built a team around me, including people that work in my office that are, you know, proudly disabled women, and that bring that perspective in the work that they do. And I've also worked to ensure that I and the entire team continually consciously upskill ourselves in the knowledge of and the perspective of autistic folks, of what it means to really champion neurodiversity, and to ensure that disability pride in those spaces is centered in the work that we do, to do the same in relation to people that are intellectually or cognitively disabled folks, and to push back on this idea that the disability looks or sounds a certain way, you know, and to ensure that we are talking about invisible disabilities, chronic illnesses and chronic diseases, the experiences of people with ME, of myalgic encephalomyelitis, and these disabilities and impairments, parts of our community that are often subject to kind of multiple overlays of stigma, whether it be ableism or other forms of stigma in society, and also to talk about lateral ableism, and to kind of facilitate conversations and to be conscious in our work of the role that ableism plays first in shaping the self conception, and that you actually have to liberate yourself from ableism first, and that folks within our disability community are also capable of being, you know, ableist towards other members of our community because of the insidious and corrosive nature of ableism. And so we actually have a workshop that we've run a bunch of times, which was kind of delivered and created by Rhiannon de Chinque, who's the one of the disabled women that works in my office, that talks about disability pride. And as it kind of talks about disability pride, first it explores what disability is, social model, medical model, affirmative model, and then unpacks ableism, both internalized, lateral, and systemic, and kind of builds all of those things together in a clear picture. So that's the work you've got to do, I think, to do well, and to know that, you know, as important as it is to speak, sometimes it's also about shutting up, and elevating others to speak, which I will do now since I'm over time.
Wonderful, thank you so much. The final question, a quick question for Mr. Shorten. What will your party do to stop the NDIS being essentially an oasis in the desert, ensure that all disabled people are able to access the supports that they need?
Well, I view the NDIS, and I was involved at the very outset of putting up the idea. I never viewed it as the only proposition for disability empowerment in Australia. But when I came into politics, I'd seen a lot of unfair treatment when I was a trade union rep organising workers. But I was stunned by the systemic second-class treatment of so many Australians living with a disability and the people who love them. So my diagnosis of the challenge or the problem was it's not disability, it's a lack of money and a lack of power. And I thought that if we could create an NDIS, what we do is amass significant capital and coin, create a centre or a flagship, a castle for disability. And from there, we could roam out and create greater support for disability more generally. Whilst I acknowledge Jordan's, you know, I listen to Jordan very carefully, and he's always incredibly educative as well as everything else. And Hollie is very passionate and smart. I don't think that the Greens aren't going to be the government, and the Liberals have been in government. And despite Hollie's best efforts, the Liberals have mismanaged the scheme. So what I want to do is to use the opportunity to be NDIS minister to sit down with the states and say, hey, let's lift the performance and support for people with disability in the schools. I want to bring in the private sector and the property people and the real estate agents and say, what are you doing to provide universal design? I want the opportunity to sit down with the Commonwealth Public Service and say, what are you doing to employ people with disability? I think there is a legitimate debate about lifting the amount of income people on the disability support pension can get before they risk their health card and their pension. I want to sit down with the Paralympians, for example, and say, how do we get you being even better role models and give you the voice to help not just people with disabilities hope and aspire, but to help educate other Australians who are unaware of disability, that it is a fact of life and it shouldn't govern the way you view people or treat people. So I'm very excited if we can form a government. And I say this without trying to hurt anyone on the Zoom's feelings who like the current government. I think the single most important issue in this election is NDIS and disability. I am worried sick that if the current crew get back into power, the NDIS will veer from, X to Y to Z, and it'll start going backwards. And whilst I'm loath to do it, I don't quite agree with Senator Hughes. When she says the problems are in the agency, well, what's the point of having a government if the agency doesn't listen to you? This idea that somehow the National Disability Insurance Agency is different to the government, I don't quite buy. And I think it's up to the government to make the agency empower people with disabilities. So we'll have a national disability strategy. We've said we want to set up a centre of disability employment excellence. We've got we've said that we want to make clear that we set up a national research centre with $15 million so that there's independent assessment. I think decisions should be based on evidence. But most importantly, as I said at the start, I want to restore trust. And I just promise that when it comes to disability, if I get to be a minister, I think it is the centre of the world and everything. I have a lens on all government decisions, from procurement to, who they deal with, to how they talk, to how they advertise, to everything, how they employ, that people with disabilities should be part of the process, not treated as either, not treated as invisible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shorten. I'm wary that we're run out of time. Thank you very much for joining us on the webinar tonight. To Mr. Shorten, to Senator Hughes, to Senator Jordan Steele-John, thank you very much for making time to listen to our community. We really appreciate your effort. To the young people, families, and people who work in the sector who joined us tonight, thank you very much for your support. Sometimes listening to conversations about our lives can be quite distressing, so we encourage everyone to partake into some self-care activities following the webinar. If you are in a headspace where you feel upset or distressed and need some support, please do reach out. We have popped some services in the chat that you can reach out to if you need. Thank you very much all for joining us tonight.